We've got to correct the record on something.
Here we go.
I hate to publicly call him out since he's my boss, but...
And it's embarrassing because this is his first go-around with us here on the morning show with some information that proved to be misinformation.
Fair's fair, and, this is why I said if it's accurate, because, I have pretty good statistical knowledge.
I know, you're a brainiac.
So the 5 Cy Young Award winners
Here we go.
convicted of drug felonies... We've detailed those. We're talking about where the White Sox may trade with the Brewers, and the Brewers will come here, and
right.
the White Sox will go to
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee.
Sox will go to Milwaukee.
Something like that. Maybe, as I suggested, Ryan Field. But anyway, got off talking about great White Sox players of yore, and we can talk about great Brewers of yore, too. I'd be happy to talk with Scott Walker, our next guest, about Harvey's Wallbangers.
Oh.
In the 80s,
right,
Harvey Keene, and with your Cecil Coopers and your Stormin Gorman Thomases and your Pete Vukovic's and your Ted Simmonses and your Robin Younces and your Jim Gantners and so forth. Be happy to talk about that.
You're a brainiac.
But here's the thing. He said, John Gallagher, our general manager, I'm quoting him here. I want to be careful. He said there were 7 Cy Young winners convicted of felonies, implying there were 2 more convicted of non-drug related felonies. And he came into the studio over the break, sheepishly.
Yeah, he didn't want to open the door, but yet he did.
Yeah.
That's the kind of man he is.
It was a tough moment. And he admitted that the 2 pitchers he thought had been convicted of non-drug felonies were, in fact, not Cy Young Award winners.
And there were misdemeanors?
and only one was a drug offense. He thought
who?
Blue Moon Odom played for the A's, of course you remember.
Yeah, I love that.
What was his real name?
And I don't know. I went to prom with that guy, right?
Johnny Lee Odom. That's right.
Yeah.
But he was. How could he think he was a Cy Young Award? He's like a 500 pitcher. Anyway, that was one he thought.
Don't be mean.
I'm not rubbing it in. And Jerry Kuzman, who of course was with the '69 Miracle Mets and then played for the White Sox in the early '80s, and was convicted of tax evasion, but. That was back when tax evasion was a crime before the era of Hunter Biden. So I'm giving Jerry Kuzman a pass on that, but also not a Cy Young Award winner.
Oh, okay. So there's just 5.
There's just the 5 that we named.
All right.
I'm glad we could clear that up. It's really important.
Now we can get on with our day, folks.
Now we can talk about less important things like the President of the United States, public policy, the quality of your life, other things like that. For more on this, so we've got a debate coming up, and I can't help but I keep going back to that op-ed that Scott Walker wrote, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or so in the Wall Street Journal, where he basically said, hey, candidates, and I think specifically Ron DeSantis, but hey, candidates, here's some lessons you may want to learn from my experience running for president. And, well, let's get an assessment of how he thinks those candidates not named Trump, but including Trump, are performing per his advice. Scott Walker is the president and CEO of Young America's Foundation. He's the former governor of Wisconsin, of course, and a former presidential candidate. Scott, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Good to be with you. By the way, the Hall of Famers on that 82 World Series team were Raleigh Fingers, Paul Molitor, and Robin Yount, which is three more stars than I'm able to name than Barack Obama was able to during the All-Star game in St. Louis when they asked him what players he loved on the White Sox, and he had silence. Heck, I don't like the White Sox. I would have said Baines, Thomas, and Fisk.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have been easy, right?
Well, that's because you're an actual sports fan. You're not pretending to be one. So that's the difference. Yeah, that's how that works out. Yeah. Oh, I mean, how could I forget Raleigh Fingers? How could I forget Paul Molitor? He's a four-tool player. All right, very good. What do you think? I mean, before we get into the serious business, what's this noise about the Brewers wanting to leave Milwaukee? We're hearing about this just as the Sox are wanting to leave Chicago for the suburbs.
Just craziness. You know, actually, ironically, the debate tomorrow is going to be at the Fiserv Forum where the Milwaukee Bucks play. When I was governor, we built that without a tax increase. I think we're the only NBA franchise that was able to do that. We did it through the players, all professional players in Wisconsin pay a prorated income tax. So we just used the 20-year increase in the TV contracts to do that. I don't know why the current governor and legislature haven't been more creative like we were with the Bucks, because there's no reason you have to raise taxes. There's no reason why you have to pour out hundreds of millions of dollars. But it's just been a total ball drop on this, and I hope it doesn't mean the Brewers are going to leave. But they've kind of gone into this typical format that you see elsewhere in the country, where they say, "Oh, if you don't give us a ton of money or raise a local sales tax to fund a renovation, we're going to leave." And that's not a good proposition.
Well,
So you think they're just barking right now?
I don't know.
The tough part is Major League Baseball. It's kind of like the NBA was at the time.
Yeah.
The NBA, when they came to us, there was a sale. Remember, former Senator Herb Kohl had saved the Bucks in the 80s. He was going to sell them, but part of the condition was the two buyers. And to their credit, Herb Kohl put $100 million in. The two buyers at the time of the Bucks put $150 million in, and the other half had to come from some sort of public sources. And the NBA, not the owners, said, "If you don't do this, we'll buy back the team and we'll move it somewhere else." I don't know that Major League Baseball is there yet, but that's kind of what they do. They put this force of the league behind it. So could be bluster, but my guess is in the world that we live in, they're probably not completely bluffing.
Well,
maybe be more creative.
Maybe you can get the Chinese communists or the Saudis to buy Major League Baseball when they're done buying the PGA and the NBA. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, one of our guys, Enos Cantor Freedom, actually just spoke at one of our Young America's Foundation conference, and he basically got knocked off because he spoke out too many times against China.
Yeah, now James Harden is going after Daryl Morley while he's sucking up to the Chi-Com so they sell his terrible wine. But I digress. All right, too much sports, Governor. We got to get to some.
We got to get to the sport of politics.
Yeah, that's well.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think of President or former President Trump sitting out the debate?
I think it's a mistake. 3 reasons. One, I think people expect them to be there. It's not conventional wisdom. The D.C. crowd thinks it's brilliant because they think, oh, you got this big lead. Why show up? But Donald Trump's never been conventional. This guy's always been unconventional, anti-D.C., anti-swamp. And I stood next to him at that first debate in Cleveland 8 years ago. This is a guy who's, if he's at a debate, takes charge. If he'd taken over the debate tomorrow and did it again the following month, this whole race would be over. So I think it's actually foolish on his part. The other 2 reasons I think it's important is Wisconsin. And we've talked about this before. Hillary Clinton, after she lost the primary in 2016, never came back to Wisconsin. How much did she lose by? 23,000 votes. Midwest voters want to see the candidates. And third, that ties in with what I'm doing now at Young America's Foundation, YAF.org if people are interested, is young people. There's a lot of people watching the debate who aren't necessarily just Republican primary voters who are 18, 19, 20 years old. 8 years ago, they weren't paying attention to this. They were kids. They were playing video games or doing what kids do. Those are voters who are going to make a difference in Wisconsin and key states across the country. He should get every chance he can to speak to them. Yeah,
it's interesting. YAF did a poll, too, that finds that young people, unsurprisingly, support age limit for presidential candidates. They are skeptical about people in their late 70s and 80s being the president.
Well, heck, you look at Biden falling asleep in Hawaii yesterday. I mean, it is. Well, as you guys know as well as I do, Joe Biden's problem started long before he started getting in his 80s. He's had a lifetime of gaffes, but they're only made worse by the age factor. And I think young people get it. If there's an age requirement in terms of a minimum age to be president of the United States, I think it's only reasonable you do it on the max end as well.
When did he fall asleep? I missed that.
Yeah, there was some sort of service. I just saw it this morning, so it must have been, Hawaiian time late yesterday. But there were shots Hannity had this morning. I saw a clip of him, sitting there at some sort of service where they were commiserating about the all the damage and obviously the deceased. And he was, the White House would probably claim he was meditating or praying at that time, but it looked like he was nodding off pretty well.
Sleepy Joe.
So the op-ed that you wrote a couple months back in the Journal that I mentioned and that we talked about previously with you, providing lessons learned to the candidates in 2023, 2024. And, it seemed to me that it was mainly geared towards Ron DeSantis because he sort of parallels you, successful 2-term governor coming into this race. And one of the lessons was don't let the consultants change who you are. Do you think DeSantis has listened to your advice?
I haven't seen it yet, but some of that's just the reality, too, of nationally at least, almost air in terms of the media is sucked out of the room by President Trump. Even places like CNN and others that don't care much for him, it's just everything's revolves around him. The answer to that question, I think, will be tomorrow. if he shows up at that debate, and it's high stakes for him. I mean, this is one of those, if it's not even just having a good performance. That's the difference between a head-to-head debate in the general election. If you're ahead or you're viewed as a contender and you do well, you're fine. In a primary, you got to be better than fine. The lesson I learned was that people loved what we did in Wisconsin. They loved our aggressiveness. They loved our track record, but they wanted to see that on the stage and see what that meant for the next 4 years as president. And so far, I don't think he's captured people's imagination that way. If he can come in and have a breakout moment or moments tomorrow, I think he's still in the fight. If he doesn't, the voters are going to move on, and they're going to see whether it's Vivek, who's already having kind of that moment just on the stump. Maybe it's Tim Scott. Maybe it's one of the other candidates. But that's the other reason why I think it would have been wise for President Trump to show up, because now if one of them has, or maybe a couple have a big moment or two, suddenly, that Fox poll that showed him way ahead as others do also showed 63% of Trump voters said they'd be willing to consider someone else if they were appealing.
Well, in the 2-hour debate, how much time do you think they're going to be, dedicating to attacking Trump or talking about the issues such as the economy and crime?
Well, I was on with Brett Barr yesterday. I saw Martha McCallum. I hope, obviously they can't completely ignore him, but I think other than really the indictments, to me, I believe voters, and it was those are some of the things we heard even from younger voters, college and high school age students we polled. Their number one issue is not what most of the media talk about. It was actually the economy. Young people, certainly older adults, family members, seniors, and others care about it, but young people actually listed the economy as number one. So I think when you look at, I filled up my pump on Saturday at Quick Trip, and it was almost $4 a gallon. Now, people on the West and East Coast may be used to that, but those of us here in the Midwest, when we start putting gas in and it's costing us close to $4 a gallon, that's a big deal. And suddenly it becomes hard to pay your bills. It becomes hard to fill up your grocery cart. Those are the things that people care about. And I hope that they'll talk about those and not just about indictments and everything else related to Donald Trump.
Wait, filling your pump up. I mean, can't YAF get you some interns or something? You have to fill up your own gas?
No, I like that he fills up his own gas tank.
Yeah, gee, great.
Hey, I have my Quick Trip
respect.
card. I got to put my number in there. Yeah, I got to get my point.
For gosh sakes. I love that about you.
They had 29 cents a pound bananas. Come on.
What kind of car are you driving these days?
gosh.
No, I want to know.
I have a Chevy Traverse.
Oh, I love those cars. What year?
2020.
All right, stop with this unauthorized biography here. All right, personal details.
I drive a used minivan, but all right.
So one thing about DeSantis in particular, but the other candidates too, it's interesting. We just talked to Matt Gaetz earlier in the show as a Trump surrogate, and he's got members of Congress. In fact, or like a Tim Scott, where are the other people that are repping them that are not sort of heavy hitting donors publicly? Don't you find that odd that there's just not a lot of surrogate presence on social media and the airwaves? I mean, and the peer-to-peer stuff is great, but don't you want to have people that have their own profile and their own bona fides, like conservative credentials, saying this is my guy, here's why? Or this is my gal, here's why?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the difference, unlike, for example, 8 years ago when it was a wide open race, is there's a lot of folks who may have a preference other than President Trump, but just don't want to deal with the grief. They don't want to deal with the pushback. Mm-hmm. Think about this, and I don't have a horse in the race, so this is just an observation. I'm neutral. We're a partner in the first debate, but I look at, someone like Governor DeSantis, who we were talking about, 2 years ago, anybody who was a Trump supporter, anybody else in the conservative movement was saying, this guy's a rock star. This guy's doing amazing things. This guy's doing all the kind of stuff we expect out of a big state governor. Today, you look some of those same voices. They're saying this guy's a rhino, and it's like only because he's running in the same race as President Trump. I like what President Trump did. I think most conservatives, most Republicans, overwhelmingly like the accomplishments during his 4 years. I think part of the test for Republican voters is, do they think there's anyone else in this race who could do the sorts of things in the next 4 years that Donald Trump was able to accomplish in his 4 years? And if they could do it as well or better and have a higher probability to get elected. That's their pitch. But so far, that hasn't broke through it. Nobody else is at least catching fire that they'll somehow be as bold or bolder than President Trump was in their upcoming term. And that, the other big part was up until recently was, any of these other candidates might be more electable than Biden. But increasingly, you're seeing in the head-to-heads that Donald Trump, depending on the poll in the state, could actually beat Joe Biden. It's not going to be easy. That's the big thing I warn people all across the country is don't think because Joe Biden's fallen asleep out of service, that means it'll be easy. If it was easy, John Fetterman wouldn't be in the U.S. Senate.
Suburban Milwaukee. Because, so Wisconsin is a battleground state, and that's the swing area in that battleground state. So you won it at the county level, as a county executive, people may remember, too. That's like Cook County. It's like 3-1 Democrat. So what other than, I know pocketbook issues, but there's got to be something else. There's got to be something else that levers suburban voters to say, I'm willing to vote for somebody that maybe is a little bit more conservative than me on these issues. To me, it seems like it's either K through 12 or it's a particular culture issue. Maybe boys playing girls sports or boys in the girls locker room. I'm not exactly sure. But what do you think? It's a combination of issue and attitude. What I mean by issue, it could be particularly since COVID, when people could see what's happening in the schools. I want to take charge. The left is trying to take away the authority for me, kind of like what Youngkin ran into in Virginia, where Terry McAuliffe said out loud what we've said for years. Liberals think that they don't want you to have any say in your kids' education. So that's a big deal in the suburbs. Although you ask a lot of suburban voters, they think their schools are great. A little bit of that shifted since COVID, but there's still some that kind of live in that non-reality. Yeah, some of it's cultural. Even with young people, surprising that poll, even women's sports, young people have been on our side on that one. But the other issue is attitude. What I mean by that is, part of what hurt Donald Trump in 2020 was that a lot of suburban voters in Wisconsin and other key states felt like he was fighting for the sake of fighting. When he won in 2016, some of those same voters felt like, this guy likes to fight, but he's fighting for the forgotten. He's fighting for people like me. He's fighting to take on the establishment because all these politicians go to Washington in both parties, and then they forget their promises, and they don't think about people like me. So it's about the attitude more than even just issues. If he's viewed as a fighter, because you're never going to change the perception as a fighter, but if he's fighting for you, then you can, local papers where former President Trump says, you're not forgotten. I'm here for you. Biden was in, I think, Poland and Ukraine at the time. Buttigieg was God knows where. Nobody had been there except Trump. And I said, that's the guy that won in 2016. Now, 2 days later, he's in, I think, Waco, Texas, calling Ron DeSantis meatball eyes or something like that. And I'm like, there's in 2 days, 48 hours, there's the difference between a guy fighting for you and a guy fighting because he likes to fight. He needs to be the guy that was there in Ohio, fighting for the forgotten. Scott Walker, President and CEO of Young America's Foundation, former Wisconsin governor and presidential candidate. Scott, thanks as always. Appreciate it. My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, I'm Henry Winkler. My eyes are very important to me. My eyes connect me with things I love. I loved my late father-in-law dearly. He always lit up a room, but his vision dimmed with age. He had